Hello and welcome to another episode of Facts, Values, and Flourishing. I'm Craig Biddle. This week we're going to talk about virtue as the art of human flourishing. In our last episode a few weeks ago, we discussed morality as the science of human flourishing, and that was just an elaboration on what we had been doing for several weeks and sort of anchoring our understanding of the facts that underlie and give rise to the principles that are requirements of human life. And in our last episode, in discussing morality as the science of human flourishing, we saw that in addition to the fact that there are factual values that we need to gain and keep in order to live, both material values, spiritual values, and political values, there is also the fact that our values are in a hierarchy of sorts. Some values are more important than others. Reason, purpose, and self-esteem, we saw, are fundamental values in that they enable us to achieve our other values, to identify and pursue and achieve our other values. So they are fundamental. And then we talked about the ways in which values in our lives are hierarchically structured, and the fact that we can actually organize our values conceptually in our minds with respect to their hierarchical importance, and then we can pursue them with respect to that hierarchy, thereby always advancing our life by pursuit of our values and never sacrificing a greater value for the sake of a lesser value in that hierarchy. We referred to that as the math of egoism, the ability to talk about values in terms of their order of importance. So you can look at them and you can make what we would call ordinal measurements, or what Ayn Rand called teleological measurements. Measurements about your choices and actions with respect to the hierarchical nature of the values that will support and advance your life. So there's a real, not only is there a hierarchy of values, but there's a mathematical way of thinking about whether your choices or actions in life are correct, whether they're consistent with and respectful of your actual hierarchy of values. So in that way, we saw that morality is indeed a science. It's based on facts. It has a purpose. It has an aim. We're trying to advance and promote and make our lives the very best that they can be. And there's a measurement system that we can use to determine whether our values, whether our choices and actions toward our values are good or bad, right or wrong. So that's the sort of scientific end of this, in that that's where we were focusing on principles. This week, we're going to focus more on the actions that these principles give rise to and recommend, or that these principles call for. So one of the things I want to talk about first is the relationship between, and the difference between, a value and a virtue. So whereas a value is something we go after, something we pursue in order to support and advance our lives, or at least that's what a value is on a rational framework, which is what we're working with here. Whereas a value is the object of an action, a virtue is the action by which you pursue a value. So that's the relationship between these two. So this week we're going to talk about the various kinds of actions, in particular the fundamental principled actions that are necessary for people, for an individual, to advance his life, pursue his values, and make his life the very best that it can be. So I do want to tie this into the framework that we've been working with, the God said, take what you want and pay for it framework, because I think you'll see that little Spanish proverb is going to, if you learn to anchor these ideas in that proverb and understand why Rand regarded that proverb as a good summary of her ethics, you'll really be able to refer to it regularly as sort of a standing order in your life. And have all of these ideas sort of attached to that, so that they come back to your mind as one big principled integration when you think about that proverb. So I want to keep referring to that. And if you think about it, we have God said, take what you want and pay for it. And what we have here in terms of values and virtues, I want to clarify real quickly. So the God said part is the facts. Reality dictates. This is the way the world is. We live in a causal environment. So take what you want, what you're going to go after are your values. These are the things that you want in life, that you want to pursue and gain and keep in order to make your life the very best it can be. And pay for it, the end part there, that's the action toward those values. That's the subject of today's talk, virtue. So God said, take what you want and pay for it. The take what you want part is the values, and the pay for it part is the virtues. Now, in essence, there's a good, very clean way to think about what a virtue is. A virtue is an action that pursues a life-serving value. So the basic idea here is to pursue your life-serving values, or to put it in negative terms, do not commit a sacrifice. Do not surrender a greater value for the sake of a lesser value. And this goes back to the hierarchy that we talked about in the last episode. Pursue your values, be true to your hierarchy of values. Do not sacrifice a greater value for the sake of a lesser value. That's the essence of being virtuous, is to do that. Now, to do that, you need to take a lot of other actions. You need a lot of principles, and you need to take a lot of other actions, because our life is extremely complex. It's long, it's decades long, and it's complex in that we're extremely complex beings, again, of mind and body, matter and spirit. We've got all sorts of needs and requirements, and we have to meet all of these. So when we get to virtues, there are some fundamental virtues. Just like as we saw, there are fundamental values. Reason, purpose, and self-esteem, we saw, are the fundamental values that human life and prosperity depend on. And now we're going to talk about the fundamental actions that human life depends on, and those would be the virtues. I'm going to focus on just 4 virtues today. Ayn Rand identified 7 fundamental virtues, and I'll mention the other 3 as well. But I just want to show in pattern how it is that certain actions based on certain principles are factually correct for human life, and why, again, all of this is rooted in perceptual observation and logic. It's all scientific. And because it's rooted in perceptual observation and logic, because it's anchored in reality and derived from reality, it therefore works in reality. And this is the beauty of Ayn Rand's ethics of rational egoism, is because it's derived from reality, it works in reality. So the first of the virtues that I want to talk about is the virtue of rationality. Unsurprisingly, that's the basic virtue in Rand's system, because reason is the basic value. Now, for each virtue today, I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about the fundamental principle that the virtue is in recognition of, and then the corresponding action. So we're still going to be talking about the principles and then the actions with those principles. So for each virtue, we're going to see that there's a recognition of a certain fact of reality here that we're dealing with. And in the case of rationality, what we're recognizing is this. So the principle of rationality is the recognition of the fact that reason is your only means of knowledge, and therefore your only judge of values, and therefore your only proper guide to action. Reason is your only means of knowledge. This is just a truth. The only way you can gain knowledge of the world is to observe reality using your 5 senses, integrate your observations into concepts, generalizations, principles, and the like. And that's where knowledge comes from. That's how we get it. So reason is your only means of knowledge. It's your only proper judge of values. I mean, you can try to judge values with your feelings, but they're not going to be accurate if you do. You're not going to know whether they're right. You need to use reason to determine whether your values are actually life-serving. And then reason is your only proper guide to action. So it's got those 3 parts. And rationality, or the principle of rationality, is the recognition of those 3 facts together. Now, what is the action then that corresponds to that recognition of reality? Well, it's the commitment to act accordingly as a matter of principle all the time. So if the principle we're recognizing here is that reason is our only means of knowledge, our only proper judge of values, and our only proper guide to action, then the virtue of rationality is the commitment to going by reason, to upholding reason as your only means of knowledge. We do have emotions. Emotions are extremely important, but they're not our means of knowledge. They're automatic consequences of the value judgments that we've made. And in relation to the experiences that we're having at any given time, that's where emotions come from. So they're important. They're our means of enjoying life, and they're also our means of feeling pain and suffering when things go wrong in life. But they're not our means of knowledge. Reason is. So the virtue of rationality consists in acting in accordance with this aspect of the principle. Reason is your only means of knowledge, so only go by reason in terms of what you're going to accept as true and false. Faith is out and feelings are out in terms of whether or not something is true. That's not how you determine that. You determine it by observation and logic. When it comes to judging which values are good for your life, again, we're not going to go by feelings or by faith. We're going to go by reason. We're going to use our actual means of knowledge to determine which values are going to promote our life and long-term happiness and which are not. Why? Because it's the only faculty that we have that can make that determination. So again, it's all fact-based. And then reason is going to be our only guide to action for all the same reasons. So there's a principle that we're recognizing, and there's a corresponding action, which is the commitment to that principle. The commitment is the verb there. That's the action. It's the commitment to always uphold reason as your only means of knowledge, your only proper judge of values, and your only proper guide to action. So that's rationality. Now that's a very, very broad virtue, and it's, in a sense, it's easy to concretize. You can point to any rational action and say, there's a person, upholding the fact that reason is his only means of knowledge. That so if you stop at an intersection where cars are zipping by, you say you're exercising there. At least in this instance, it appears somebody's exercising the virtue of rationality. You're stopping. Why? Because reason tells you if you go out in the middle of the intersection, you're going to get killed if the cars are coming. Or if you pay attention to your diet, if you eat healthy food because you want to maintain good health, then that's an act of rationality. But rationality is not just an instance here and an instance there of this kind of action. It's a commitment to being this way as a matter of principle. So it's broader than just any one or two or three given actions. It's a commitment to live by means of this principle as a matter of principle. And this is going to be the case for all of the virtues. So that's rationality. Always uphold reason as your only means of knowledge, your proper judge of values, and your proper guide to action. So let's go on now to the virtue of honesty. And again, we'll see. Honesty has a principle and an action in relation to it. So the principle is the recognition of the fact that reality is what it is. Facts are what they are, and pretending otherwise does not change those facts. Pretense does not change reality. We can pretend that facts are other than they are, but it doesn't have any effect on the facts. It only has a negative effect on us because it separates us from reality. It takes what we are holding in our mind away from the actual facts, and therefore disconnects us from reality when we pretend. And so it's not good. It can never be good for you. You cannot gain values by exiting the realm of values, right? Reality is the realm in which values exist, in which we can identify facts, pursue, combine things together in the world to make new things in the world, be creative, understand other people and their motives and their values, etc. So friendships come from this. Everything comes from keeping our mind connected to reality. And so when we disconnect our mind from reality by pretending that facts are other than they are, it can only be devastating, or it can only be detrimental. And in many cases, it's absolutely devastating. So the principle here is that reality is what it is, facts are what they are, and that's regardless of our hopes, fears, wishes, desires, feelings, faith, anything. None of that can alter the facts. So that's the basic principle that honesty is recognizing. And then the act of honesty is the refusal to pretend that facts are other than they are. It's the commitment to always acknowledging the facts and upholding them, or in negative terms, it's the refusal ever to pretend that facts are other than they are. Now, obviously, this does not mean you can't participate in make-believe and in fiction or play acting or movie or any kind of genuine good fantasy. There's nothing wrong with that. So what we're talking about here is the instances in which some people will pretend that facts are other than they are because they think they can get something from doing that. And you can't. You can't get something, even if it appears that you do. To give a long example on this that you can go read in my book, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It, I do a long, drawn-out example in which a bank robber robs a bank and he gets the money and he makes it to the islands, so that it looks like he, by pretending that the money belonged to him and getting hold of it and getting to the islands, that he actually achieved the value. Now he's got this money and he's off at the islands and he didn't get caught. So didn't he achieve a value? Well, not if you take the full context of what it means to live a human life into account. He didn't achieve anything. In fact, he set himself up for a life of utter misery. First of all, he knows he's a crook, so he cannot have high self-esteem. He knows that he didn't produce this wealth or do anything to earn it. He stole it. He's a parasite, and he knows that. You cannot escape this kind of knowledge when you know that this is the kind of person you are and the kind of thing that you've done. And then the example in the book goes on to talk about, who's he going to befriend? Is he going to befriend people of virtue who actually earned their money? Then the first aspect of their relationship, the first encounter of their relationship that underlies everything else that goes on in the relationship is going to be a lie. It's going to be him telling them that he earned this money somehow. Otherwise, the good people wouldn't befriend him. You can't go tell them that he's a crook, right? So that's going to be the basis of every relationship, and then it snowballs from there. Or is he going to go and befriend a bunch of crooks? And if so, then what's the consequences of your friends all being crooks? So if you think broadly and deeply about what it means to live a human life and the actual, spiritual and psychological needs and the actual long-term requirements of life, given the way that the world actually works, you can see that dishonesty simply does not pay. It always runs you aground. And this is, I've seen this so many times in people's lives where they think they're going to get away with some kind of a pretense, and it just catches up with them, and it catches up with people all the time. So that's the basic principle of honesty, is the fact that things are what they are, recognition of the fact that things are what they are, and that pretense cannot change that. And then the corresponding action is refusal to fake reality. It's the commitment to always acknowledging the facts, going by the facts. And sometimes facts are unpleasant, but you still have to acknowledge them if you want to deal with reality and do the best that you can to advance your life within the facts before you, within the actual context. So that's the virtue of rationality. The next virtue I want to mention is productiveness. Now, again, we've got recognition of a certain fact, and that fact is that human values, the values on which human life and happiness depend, do not come ready-made in nature. Air exists, we get to just breathe the air, so there's that. But pretty much everything else has to be identified and pursued, and our values actually have to be created. Even to pick a berry off of a bush requires productive effort. You've got to pick the berry, and it also requires the use of your mind, because some berries are poisonous. So if you pick the wrong berry off the bush and eat it, you're going to be sorry, if not dead. So there's no getting around the fact that human values don't come ready-made in nature. We have to do the work, the thinking and the productive work necessary to produce values. We have to produce the values on which our life depends. So we've got to either produce goods or services. And then we can trade those for other goods and services that people have produced. And that's the beauty of a free market, is that we can all take advantage of each other's strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and the products that we've produced. But to do that, you have to be productive. So it's recognition of the fact that human life requires productiveness. It requires being productive. Now, if you're not productive, you might be able to continue to exist because other people might just, give you the goods that you need. But that makes you a parasite, right? So you're either going to be a productive person, acknowledging the fact that you have to produce in order to live, or you're going to wind up either dying or being a parasite on others who decide to produce and give you the things on which your life depends. So you can't get around the fact that human life requires productiveness. The corresponding action, of course, is simply a commitment to being productive in life. It's a commitment to coming up with a way to support yourself by hopefully pursuing something that you love to do. Not everybody does choose something that he or she loves to do in life as a productive activity. I highly recommend that. We live once, so you want to try. I think you want to try to get your head around something that you can do with, you spend a lot of time in your life doing your job. So try to find a job that you really enjoy doing, and thereby you can support your life in the process of doing something that you love. So that's the virtue of productiveness in brief. All of these are just sketches of this. This is just nothing comprehensive here. This is just all an indication of what a virtue is, and some of these fundamental virtues, and how it is that they're actions in recognition of certain principles, certain facts of reality. So the next virtue I want to talk about, and this will be the last that I talk about at any length today, is independence. So independence is the principle of independence is the recognition of the fact that no one can do your thinking for you, that no one can choose your values for you, that no one can pursue your values for you, that no one can live your life for you. It's recognition of the fact that your mind and your values and your life are your responsibility. Only you can do the thinking to arrive at truths that you know are true. You can't turn to somebody else and say, tell me what's true. Because even if they tell you what's true, you don't know that it's true unless you've done unless you've made the observations and the integrations to understand this truth. You don't know whether it's true. So the only way you can gain knowledge is by using your own mind. So independence is recognition of that. It's also the case that no one can tell you what's going to be best for your life, at least not definitively. You have to figure out what's going to be best for your life. You have to judge what's of value to you and what's not on your own. You can't turn to other people and have them make those judgments for you, because you won't have any way of knowing whether they're correct. Only your mind can determine what's right for your life. So it's not only a matter of truth, it's also a matter of value. You have to choose to use your mind to understand the world and to select your own values, because no one else can do this for you. Now, other people can pretend to be able to do it for you, and you could pretend that they can do it for you, but it doesn't change the fact that only your mind can deliver truth into your mind, that only your choice of values can make the values actual and real for you, given your context and the things that you want to achieve in life. So the principle of independence is simply the recognition of the fact that you have to choose your own values, you have to do your own thinking, and no one else can do this for you. The corresponding action here is the commitment to always maintaining an orientation toward the facts, between your mind and the facts of reality. That's got to be your primary orientation in life, rather than what? Rather than primary orientation toward other people, toward what they think is true, what they think you should value. That is what Ayn Rand calls second-handedness, this primary orientation toward other people, where instead of focusing your mind on the facts of reality as you see it and making your own decisions about your life, you instead turn to other people and say, oh, what do you think I should accept as the truth? What do you think I should value? What do you think I should go after? How do you think I should live? That kind of a psychology is the result, ultimately, of committing, or not committing, of defaulting to letting other people tell you what to do, and if you do that repeatedly over time, you'll actually develop a psychology of second-handedness that is just detrimental to your life, because you cannot live a good life if you're just turning to other people for truth and value. So the principle of independence is only your mind can understand the world for yourself. Only your mind can choose values that are going to make your life great. Other people can't do your thinking or valuing for you. And then the action corresponding to that is the commitment to maintain a primary orientation toward the facts of reality, not toward other people. Now, this does not mean that other people don't matter. Other people do matter. Obviously, I mean, the people who you love matter very much to you. That's what it means to love people. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife or children or friends or acquaintances that matter a lot to you, your doctor, your accountant, the people you work with in life. There are a lot of people that matter to us, including a lot of strangers who produce goods and services that we are able to trade and enhance our lives with. Think of all the tech gadgets and the automobiles and airplanes and medical devices and everything that we have. We don't know the people. We don't personally know these people, but they produce these goods, and we can trade and prosper, benefit and prosper from their productiveness. So it's not that other people don't matter. It's also not that there's no such thing as experts in a given field. There are experts all over the place. When you go to visit your doctor, he knows more about medicine than you do, and that's why you're going there. But it never is the case that you should cease to have a primary orientation toward the facts of reality and only a secondary orientation toward the opinions or advice of other people. If a doctor tells you something that doesn't make sense to you, you shouldn't just accept it as true, right? So you're always, if you're on the premise of independence and you're upholding the virtue of independence, you're always going to make your primary orientation toward the facts. What are the facts as I see them? Do I understand this? What makes sense to me, given the facts? And getting advice from experts or deferring to people on occasion who may know something that you don't, in an immediate crunch where you've got to make a decision and you don't, there's no way for you to make a quick judgment about something. You might just, take somebody's word for something. But by and large, the way that you live, if you are upholding the principle of independence and enacting the virtue of independence, is you say, what are the facts? I'm not going to accept anything unless I understand why it's true, and I'm not going to accept any values as legitimate unless I see how they do, in fact, support and enhance my life. So you can see here the pattern of what a reason-based, life-based virtue is. It's a principled action, and principled because it's always based on a principle. It's based on some recognition of the facts of reality. It's a principled action in support of and in advancement of your life and long-term happiness. So there are, the three virtues, the fundamental virtues that Rand mentions also and discusses that I did not bring up today are justice, integrity, and pride. But each of them has essentially the same kind of thing. Each has a virtue, a principle that each is in recognition of, and a corresponding action. So I'll set those. You can, if you want to read more on the virtues, you can find them in Ayn Rand's The Virtue of Selfishness. She discusses the virtues in there. In her novel Atlas Shrugged, there's a whole section called Galt's Speech where you'll be able to see where Rand discusses the virtues specifically in terms of recognition of the fact that ... in each case. You can also, I strongly recommend reading The Fountainhead, which is a hymn to the virtue of independence, and absolutely a beautiful story about that. So if you haven't read those books yet, definitely read those. I wrote, again, my book, Loving Life, is a real chewing of these virtues. There's a chapter all about virtue, and I go into detail about each one. So there are plenty of places you can look up more information on those. But for this episode of Facts, Values, and Flourishing, I just wanted to give the pattern of what a virtue is in relation to values and why certain virtues are indeed fact-based, and therefore they're things that anyone who wants to live and prosper actually should do. So again, this is fact-based scientific morality. The last thing I want to talk about today is the fact that as we began this whole series with by acknowledging the fact that there's this huge self-help industry. It's a $12 billion annual industry of people trying to help other people live wonderful lives. And that's a great thing. It's a beautiful fact that this industry exists. Not everything, not all of the self-help materials in the industry are good. In fact, probably only a small fraction of them are really good. But the good ones are good. Why? Because they're actually instances of and applications of the kinds of principles that we've been talking about. So every piece of self-help advice that has any merit at all, whether it's something as simple as, Jordan Peterson's 12 rules, something like stand up straight and make your bed and those kinds of things, which aren't really principles. Those are just sort of little they're little commandments of sorts. So they're, making your bed is not a fundamental in life. Some people make their beds and some people don't. I don't think that has any real significance about the way that you live the rest of your life. But insofar as it helps some people to feel like they accomplished something first thing in the day to make their bed, why is that good? It's good because of the way that it promotes your life. It's good because it actually advances your life and happiness, and otherwise it wouldn't be good. That's all it can mean for something to be good. But I also want to point out that there's a hierarchy of fundamental or fundamentality when it comes to self-help advice, and I want to point out just 3 or 4 instances of really good self-help advice that's out there. I want to show how it is anchored in very philosophic ideas, the very ideas that we've been talking about. So the first one I want to do, and I'm going to name some famous people here who have actually enacted these ideas so that you can see that these are really powerful ideas. So Steve Jobs was famous for saying that he regularly reminded himself of the fact that he is going to die. He would say, I'm going to die. And that would bring to his mind the fact that he's got a limited amount of time on this planet. He's got a limited amount of time in life, and every moment matters. So how are you going to live your life? You're going to die sometime. And he also was famous for saying, being the richest man in the graveyard is not my goal. That didn't interest him. What interested him? Making something beautiful, making something wonderful, being productive, being creative. When we're creative, that's when we're being fully human. That's when we're using our rational faculty and our unique abilities to make our lives the best that they can be. And that very act, that process, is what Jobs loved. And that's why he was so incredibly successful. Now, he had some wacky ideas, and we could criticize those in another video. I'm not going to get into that now. For the most part, Steve Jobs lived his life by rational principles, by acknowledging that I'm going to die. If I want my life to be wonderful, then I need to make the decisions that are going to make it wonderful. I need to make the right plans, to take the right actions. I need to correct course when that needs to be done. And if you look at his life, you can see that that's exactly what he did. He had a lot of ups and downs. There were failures here and there. He didn't care about the failures. Failures didn't stop him because he kept reminding himself, I'm going to die. I want to make my life great. What can I do now to do that? And that was his basic MO, and the trajectory of his life was there for all to see. We're all walking around with the technology that he either created or enabled. So, and think about how deep that advice there is. I'm going to die. Jobs said that he thinks that death is one of the best inventions in life. because by reminding yourself that you're going to die, it sort of focuses the mind on the here and now and the fact that you better make the most of your life because it's going to end. So that kind of advice, the kind of advice that gets really deep into philosophy, I think is the best kind of self-help advice. And there's a lot of it out there, so I'm going to do another video or series perhaps even on that. But I want to point out another wonderful man, a huge hero of mine, and that is Jeff Bezos. And one of his sort of standing orders or MOs in life. And Bezos operates on what he calls a regret minimization framework. And as he says in the interview where he talks about this, he says only a nerd would come up with that for the name of the thing. But here's to the nerds, right? Thank goodness for the Jeff Bezoses and the Steve Jobs of the world. But this is the basic idea here is this. And by the way, this is how Jobs decided to leave a very cush Wall Street job where he could have, did I say Jobs? I meant Bezos. This is where Bezos decided to leave a very cush Wall Street job in, I think, his 20s, and go off on this harebrained venture for this new thing called the internet, where he wanted to sell books on the internet. And when he told his boss that he was thinking about doing this, his boss said, you know, that sounds like a really good idea for somebody to do who doesn't already have a good job. So why don't you take 24 hours to think about it? And Bezos took 24 hours. And the way that he thought about it was this. He projected himself to 90 years old. And he said, would I regret making this decision and trying this, even if it failed? Would I regret that when I'm 80? Or would I be proud of the effort? Or would I regret not making that choice when I saw and thought that it was a really good idea? And so his principle here is to project yourself forward and think about how would you, toward the end of life, look back and think about your decisions. Would you regret taking risks that might fail, and that, you know, many times the risks that we do take fail? Are you going to regret those things, or are you going to feel proud that you took those actions and you made the effort? And invariably, he finds himself saying, you know, go for it, do it. And that's what he did, and that's how Amazon came to be. He made that projection. He did his regret minimization framework thinking. He decided to go do it, and now not only has he rained values on the world for decades, he's also the wealthiest man on the planet. So again, this is a very powerful, very deep sort of philosophic approach to life, because it's acknowledging that, look, we're aging, we're going to get old, we're eventually going to die. It's kind of related to Steve Jobs' point here. We're going to get old, we're going to die. Life is full of risks. We can either take them or not. We can live a sort of complacent life, just, you know, going through life and checking the boxes. Or we can decide, hey, I want to try something that I think will make my life absolutely fabulous, and go for it, and take the risk of failure, and take the risk of having to exert enormous amounts of effort and thought and just to really engage with the world. It's hard. It's hard, but life is hard, and it's beautiful. It's what makes life awesome is coming up with big plans, going after things, being productive, being creative, suffering failures, getting back up, keeping going, and building a fabulous life for yourself. And regret minimization framework is a really helpful, and I think a very philosophic way of thinking about your life. So there's another sort of standing order. I'll mention a couple more. The famous hockey player, Wayne Gretzky, was famous for saying 100% of the shots you don't take won't go in. And I love this. I call it the 100% rule. And I love it because it's basically the law of identity applied to choices you're going to make about whether you're going to do something or not. Because it's true. 100% of the efforts you don't make aren't going to produce any fruit for you. 100% of the jobs you don't apply for, you're not going to get. 100% of the girls you don't ask out, you're not going to have a date with. 100% of the business plans that you don't write aren't going to get any funding, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, I think, a beautiful sort of micro virtue, if you will. There's a principle. 100% of the shots you don't take won't go in. It's sort of a metaphoric principle, but there it is. And if you embrace that and then act on it, remind yourself regularly, hey, you're wavering about whether to take an action. You say, well, either I'm going to take the action and maybe succeed, or I'm not going to take the action and I'm definitely not going to succeed. What's it going to be? Take the action, right? Now, this doesn't mean act without thinking. Obviously, everything I'm talking about is act with thinking. But bear in mind that you live once, and that if you don't go after your dreams and your goals and your values, you're simply not going to achieve them. God said, take what you want and pay for it. The pay for it part is what we're talking about here. And it's the virtues, it's the actions toward the goals that are your values. You either take them or you don't, and if you don't, then you don't get the goods. It's that simple. So see, this is just all so fact-based, and this kind of self-help advice, this kind of really rich, deep, philosophically significant self-help advice is the kind that I get excited about and that I use in my life. And I'm going to do an episode, I think, on what I call micro virtues, or what is frequently called within objectivist circles standing orders. I'll give one more, and this is just a standing order that I use because I think it's helpful, and then we'll call it quits today. So I have long used a standing order for myself, which is simply go about your business. And what this means to me and how I use this is, by business, I mean my life, the business of living. And what I mean by go about your business is I actually have a plan about what I'm up to in life at any given time. Now, my plans are constantly changing because I'm constantly reassessing things and revising things and redirecting my life based on new evidence, ideas, circumstances, etc. So it's not like I have a rigid plan that I stick to without any change. But I do always have a plan for what I'm up to. And so when I remind myself to go about my business, what I'm reminding myself of is don't do things that seem immediately pleasing. Don't go by your emotions. Your emotions don't tell you what's going to make your life great long term. Your rational, considered thinking tells you that. And I've done that thinking. That's why I have a plan. I did that thinking and developed whatever plan I have. Now, I can always go and reassess the plan, but that's an application of reason. So if I find myself doing something like, maybe surfing the internet when I know that I really need to be working, or I've got some deadlines and I've got to get things done, or if I find myself, watching television, which is very rare, like channel surfing for news or something, rather than being deliberate about how I'm spending my time, I sort of snap my fingers and go, whoa, go about your business. You have a plan here. And it helps to remind me to stick with my plan, or at least revisit it if that's the better course of action. But don't just drift. Don't just wander into oblivion, oblivion in your life, because every moment matters. I talked about this in the last episode. There's no such thing as a neutral goal or action, because every moment that passes is gone forever. You cannot get it back. So go about your business for me. That doesn't mean never take a rest. It doesn't mean never relax and watch a television show or a movie or do something leisurely. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that when you do those things, make sure that that's part of the plan. That's part of what the business of my life is. And there's a lot of that in my life. But I want to do it deliberately because I don't want to miss a moment in life. It's just too precious. So I hope you're seeing from yet more angles how it is that this beautiful scientific morality that Ayn Rand devised, rational egoism, and the fact that it's based on observation and logic, and the fact that it helps to advance our lives if we embrace and use it, and that if other people embrace and use it, it helps to advance their lives, and that if we all embrace and use it, it helps to advance everybody's life, including supporting a proper government, which I'll do another episode on. So it just is this beautiful, beautiful thing, and we now have it. So let's use it. Share these ideas. If you have friends who haven't seen this series yet, share these videos. Let people know about this. And what we'll do next week, I'm gonna do an additional episode next week. So next week will not be the end of this series. I'm gonna do one more video because I want to talk next week more about how, in light of these virtues that we've just discussed and what virtues are in relation to values, I want to discuss how to organize your values hierarchically, and then how to set some standing orders for yourself so that you actually do uphold that hierarchy. So we'll get into a little bit of my own personal approach to things next week and the way that I do things, and I'll just show you in pattern how that has worked for me. I think you'll find that useful, or I hope you will. And then in the following episode, we'll wrap everything up by sort of pulling everything together into a big, massive integration that I think will help you to really retain and put these ideas to use to make your life wonderful and to help other people who you love to make their lives wonderful. So until next episode, love your life.